As they prepared for a potential assault on a castle the next morning, our adventurers geared up with some of the new items they'd found the day before. Whiskey, in particular, chose to put on an amulet that seemed to warm at the touch of only him. Then they set out toward Baelor's keep. As they approached, they realized what was believed to be a large stone fortress was not much bigger than Ulyr's mansion. The old man shrugged and said the Baelor family was always full of bluster, but not much substance. Largely in disrepair and at first glance appearing that no one may be home, Pix crept up to attempt to open the big front doors. Instead, he stepped on a plate that opened the doors for him, alerting the fiendish inhabitants to their presence and triggering a fight through hallways and small rooms throughout the house. Anna summoned the power of the moon through the brightness of the morning sun and began to blaze a path down the hall for the others to follow, even as more fiends began to approach from the outskirts of the grounds. Ulyr shifted into a monstrous werewolf form and called for Whiskey to help him keep the rear assault from reaching their friends. And so the two of them kept the ambushers from reaching the main party. Meanwhile, Link, Ryan, and Pix soon discovered an elderly goblin woman who had convinced Link that they should be friends, while Ryan and Pix continued to attempt to take her down. Eventually they cornered her, but as Ryan delivered the killing blow, he recognized a small ruby gemstone in the center of her forehead, one that curiously matched his own sapphire. Quickly covering her face, he informed the group that she was no one important and that they should keep searching. In the stockpile of the keep, they came across a handful of discarded gems, including a strange garnet one carved in the shape of a dodecahedron. Though it detected as magical, the casters in the group couldn't quickly make heads or tails of it. They also uncovered a diary of some sort that seemed to indicate that this old woman may have been a servant, or perhaps even a warlock, of a particular entity she referred to as Master Taigen. Meanwhile, having watched Ulyr rend the last of the fiendish creatures to pieces and observing the collection of bodies on the ground, Whiskey grasped at his amulet and fell into a trance. In it, he looked around. He was surrounded by his fellow brethren, all wearing armor of the Claret Order. With sighs of resignation, they charged into a large chamber as dozens of devils poured out of a giant portal at the center of the room. He fought with grim determination while the spellcasters bought enough time to finally close the portal. But the battle had come with massive casualties, and he observed scores of friends whose dead bodies now littered the chamber. A nearby soldier grabbed his arm, pulling him back and telling him it was time to go. They rushed backward, out of the room, around a corner where a member of the Order collapsed the tunnel, sealing in the remaining devils with no way of exit. That room would be their deaths, and for their fallen brothers and sisters, their tombs. Whiskey saw his hands reach into a satchel and pull out a now familiar map, making a few sketch additions to the layout. His vision blurred, and as he recovered, he saw he was once again mid-battle. While once again underground, these were rocky caverns of large mountains elsewhere. Before he even had time to fully connect with what was happening, his opponent, a massive white dragonborn, reached out, ripped off the amulet he wore, took a deep, chilly breath, and exhaled a frosty stream. Whiskey felt his body stiffen and freeze, then watched helplessly as his enemy kicked at his crystalline form and he tumbled helplessly into the void below. Then, just as he expected to hit the ground, Whiskey came to with a start. His friends all surrounded him with looks of concern. He did his best to explain what he had seen, and they decided that this amulet may just be the vestige that the Bright Queen suspected was connected to him. After a brief rest back at the mansion, our heroes ventured back to the Cat and the Fiddle for some much-needed relaxation. Sir Calimaar had a long conversation with a man he only introduced as an old friend. Ryan was reunited with his family, who were both bewildered but ecstatic to find that he wasn't dead, though they had been led to believe otherwise. They had even gone so far as to have a funeral for him. It was then that he realized he couldn't run from the gambling debts he had racked up in a local hall before disappearing to chase bounties. The owner of the underground gambling hall here, a man named Elgris, had used every shady tool within the bounds of the law to extract what Ryan owed from the Dumar family. Ryan discovered that of the more than 2,300 gold that he owed, his parents had managed to come up with 1,000, and were still on the hook for the rest. Ryan gave his father all of the gold on his person, hoping it would be enough to take care of the rest. Though he tried to keep it a secret from the others, those more keen of hearing discovered what was happening. Whiskey secretly discovered how much was left of the debt and paid for his friend out of his own personal funds. To this day, Ryan believes that he had managed to pay off the rest of his debt on his own, and Whiskey hasn't seen fit to tell him otherwise. This did allow for occasion for Whiskey and Ryan to visit the Dumar family, and while Ryan caught up with his mother and assured her that he was doing okay, Whiskey was reintroduced to Ryan's younger sister Ava. She was helping to run the family bell factory, but Whiskey remembered what a beautiful singer she was and convinced her to perform that night at his family's tavern before the group set off for parts unknown. Shyly but happily, she agreed. And perform she did. With Whiskey's accompaniment, Ava brought down the house. His mother offered her a standing job whenever she was available to sing, and Whiskey promised to sponsor her at the Rexentrum Bards College as soon as she was available to start. To everyone's surprise, Ulir himself had come down from his manor to enjoy the performance. He said their visit had reminded him of how important it was for social interaction. And besides, I need to find someone to carry on the Order of the Lycan before I completely kick it. Meanwhile, Calimaar had introduced the others to his friend, Willam de Garrett, a half-elf who had spent some of his time as a member of the Crown's Guard before venturing out on his own. Together, they explained that Calimaar's previous dealings with fellow drow had left him with more than a little misgivings about their true intentions, and he believed himself not to be objective enough to see this project through. He was tasking Willam with participating in his stead, hoping that his lack of trust in the Bright Queen was merely folly and not justified. All told, the night ended with a great amount of joy and happiness. The Dumar family was reunited, Elgris was paid off, Ava would soon follow in Whiskey's path toward becoming a bard, and the group had already managed to recover one of the vestiges. All was well within the party. That is, until nightfall. Upon falling asleep, Ryan was visited by the strange entity who had for years protected his dreamscape from nightmares. It spoke great words of the powerful gift that had been bestowed upon him and how the wretched goblin woman wanted only power. It told him that he would be given her gift as a reward for destroying this failed servant. Then, it instructed him to save as much of his treasure as possible, not to spend it frivolously, and that some among his group were not to be trusted. When he met with his companions for breakfast the next morning, they were confused and more than a little concerned upon seeing Ryan with not one, but 2 gems on his forehead, one blue and one red. It was decided that their need to travel to Rexentrum and the Library of the Cobalt Soul now had another reason. Quickly saying their goodbyes, the troop set out northward for the capital city. Along the way, they were set upon by a group of bandits with dark powers. Managing to survive the ambush, they decided to make camp inside the small cave their enemies had made as their home. In the middle of the night, they were approached by a mysterious figure wearing an abstract mask whose appearance could change on a whim. This man, after assessing each one of them and giving more than a long pause at Ryan, informed them that he had been pursuing a bounty on the head of the leader they had just slain. He offered to pay them gold outright, worth more than the price of the bounty, and allowed them whatever spoils they had found in exchange for the orc leader's head and a few small tokens of evidence these were the correct targets. He needed them in order to properly turn in the bounty, though he was a bit miffed that they had botched what he claimed was months' worth of investigation to get at the heart of whomever was really in charge of this group he referred to as a cult. The strange man also introduced himself in due time as Dehan Omu, though little more about himself was offered. Seeing no reason to turn down a more than reasonable offer, and at least a little apologetic about interrupting his operation, our heroes agreed. Dehan procured what he needed and set off in the still dark of the early morning. When the sun finally rose, the companions continued on Centrum.